And while you guys are doing that, I want to go ahead and walk through our lesson objectives. So we have about an hour and a half, and here's what we want to go through. And again, we're going to be hitting a lot of CSS topics over the next couple weeks, so we have a lot of stuff to cover. But today, we want to talk about defining CSS and describing its use, how to add CSS rules to your app, talk about the structure of CSS, demonstrate how to apply rules to a specific tag, list some common element properties that can be styled, describe IDs and classes. So that's a really big one. That's going to come into play with CSS, HTML, when we get into DOM manipulation in JavaScript. Describe the cascade. Describe how to combine various selectors. Describe something called specificity. And then if we have some time, we're a little abbreviated today because of outcomes, I want to put you guys back into breakout rooms like yesterday and have you guys add some CSS to the HTML blog post that you guys were working on yesterday. So maybe we'll get through this and give you guys some lab time before your outcome session. So let's get into it. As we start, I wanted to just get a quick visual, like a fist to 5. So a 5 is I'm very comfortable with CSS, I'm a rock star at styling, and a 1 would be I don't even know how to link it up to my application. So let's see how you guys are doing. Pedro is, I guess that's Pedro's arm. I just see the 2. Okay, cool. So we got 2s, 3s, 4s. Perfect. So yeah, that's about right. That's where we should be for sure. Again, CSS, I feel like, is just one of those things you get in there and you play around with it, get in the sandbox, and eventually it really starts clicking. So in the interest of time, I had 2 links if you're looking on the README. Maybe we'll go through this. We have a little bit of a longer lesson time in the next days and weeks. But I'd like to take a look at some really cool apps and projects that were built with CSS just to get a sense of what's possible with CSS3. So if you guys want to click these at your leisure, if you just want to check them out, these are just 2 random examples that I pulled. But kind of the point of looking at these examples is that CSS has come a long way. It used to not be quite as powerful. It used to not be able to do animations and transitions and really complex things like it can now. And CSS3 is actually, there are several libraries out there using like CSS3 and some very, very basic JavaScript that will mimic behaviors, and you can create apps that do things using CSS3 that previously you needed like a really crazy dense JavaScript library to do. But CSS3 has come such a long way that you can do a lot of cool, powerful stuff with CSS that previously you couldn't do it. You would have to use JavaScript or some other JavaScript library. So we'll talk about that over the next few weeks. But if you want to click on those links after the lesson, just to kind of whet your appetite for what we're capable of accomplishing with CSS3, it's actually come a long way. So give me a thumbs up in Slack if you have your your CodePen open. So go ahead and just give me a thumbs up. I want to make sure that we're all kind of comfortable and ready to go with CodePen. Cool. Yeah, we're looking good. So Adam's asking about that one. So Adam, is that the link from like the previous one we worked on, or? Oh, sorry. So one of the links, one of the examples for CSS that I put into Slack was just a CodePen sample of some really cool like virtual reality animation. So we're not talking about that one. If you just want to go to codepen.io and just create a new pen, if you haven't created an account, you can still just in the top right-hand corner click create a new pin. You don't even have to sign in to do it. Okay, cool. Sweet. So I'm about to paste in kind of the next lesson section into Slack, but before I do, I wanted to open it up to the floor. Can someone describe CSS and what it stands for? So if you want to come off mic, maybe give us your definition, description of what CSS stands for, what it's going to do for us.
Cascading style sheets.
Cool. Can you, so that's what CSS, the abbreviation, stands for. Can you take that a little bit further? What do cascading style sheets mean? What do they do for us?
I understand the cascading part. I don't really know how to describe it. But it's basically HTML is the framework, CSS is what you're actually seeing visually. I mean, I know we can see HTML structurally on the, on pretty much everything justified left, top to everything on top of each other on the left hand side of the screen, but puts it to life. CSS puts it to life, but this cascading part is not necessarily an order of operations.
That's close. I think it's kind of in that ballpark for sure. Does anyone else want to help out Brad? Like maybe kind of add on to that description?
Yeah, basically, I would say that CSS is, it basically allows you to decorate your HTML content. So it allows you to take whatever text you have and like add borders, colors, and a whole bunch of decorations that you can't do with just HTML alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I put in some terms into Slack. So when I teach workshops and stuff, this is a very kind of simplistic way that I like to think about these three pillars of kind of a basic website. So I think of HTML as the nouns of our page, right? We went over that yesterday. It's kind of the scaffolding, the structure of our page, but it doesn't really do much. CSS you could think of as the adjectives of our page. So what does something look like? What size are my images or my divs? What fonts are we using? So it's very descriptive. And then JavaScript, which we're going to be spending a lot of time on, JavaScript you could think of as the verbs of the site. So JavaScript, we have click events, we have hovers. It deals with the behavior of our site. So this is how I think of like the three pillars of web development, at least for the front end anyway. But to revisit the idea of cascading, I think you guys hit on some really good points. So we'll talk about it a little bit later in the lesson, but with cascading, it's just the idea that certain tags and HTML elements can inherit properties, CSS properties from each other. So we're going to take a look at how if tags are nested, if we have classes and IDs, how those style rules can be passed on to children and such. So that's what I think of when I think of cascading, the priority of the rules and how they're passed down to their child elements. So really good. That's awesome. I'm going to paste in a little bit of a screenshot from the lesson here just to kind of firm up that CSS description. So cascading, obviously, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but the C stands for cascading. Style, we're making things pretty. We're describing what the page should look like. And then the sheets. So it's just a sheet of text. It's not necessarily a program in like the logical sense, although some CSS can be logical. But we literally will create like a separate CSS style sheet most of the time, and then we put our rules in there. So cascading style sheets. How can we add CSS to our app? Does someone want to, let's just put that in Slack. What are some ways to put CSS into our app? Cool. So Jason suggests putting it into the HTML. We have attribute, inline, CSS link. So yeah, let's take these one at a time. Jason, would you mind coming on mic and elaborating, put it in the HTML? Because I feel like that could mean several different things. You wanna...
Sure. If I understand the question, you're talking about how can we? Well, yeah, I think so. With HTML, you can just say have a p tag and lorem ipsum, but then you can also do a p tag and then tell it to style it in a certain way, like giving it a certain color right there within the HTML.
So when you say HTML, do you mean putting the CSS somewhere in the head? Do you mean maybe putting it like on the tag itself? Like specifically, what are you thinking?
On the tag itself. So
Okay.
instead of p tag, you have p and then different styles, color, background color, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So Zach also put that into Slacks, as did Brad. So yeah, if we put the rules directly on a tag, we refer to that as inline styling. So yeah, perfect. That's a really good way to put the styles on an element. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and throw it out there. Is inline styling the preferred way to add CSS rules to our HTML? I see some heads nodding, so that's cool. Let's see, who can we call on? Sorry, shake your heads one more time. Is inline styling... Okay, I'm gonna call on Farouk. I wanna get everyone some game time here. Shanaz is doing that.
I spoke to a few different developers that I know in the General Assembly campus in New York, and they actually said that you should never style inline because it's not the right way to do it. It's better you keep it separate, just like your JavaScript file, and you have like a separate file for each thing that you're doing, so it's just easier to read for someone who's going to edit it later on.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So can you take it a step further, or can someone add on to that? Why wouldn't inline styling be maybe our first best practice way to add rules, CSS rules to our HTML? What may be kind of the downside of inline styling?
Maybe having to style element by element as opposed to adding classes and then styling everything as a class or an ID.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's one excellent reason. It's just not very efficient because with inline styling, it's not very flexible or modular. We'd have to put styles on each element tag and such. Yeah, that's excellent. Does anyone else want to come on mic and offer any more thoughts? Why wouldn't inline styling be like the best way to do that? Best way to add CSS?
So if you have multiple pages, you have to go through and style each element in every page, even if it's the same element.
Yes. Thank you. That's another huge reason, right? So it's not reusable. It's not modular. So the best practice would be to put it maybe in a separate style sheet, and then we can link that one set of rules to several different pages. Particularly if your app, maybe your app's really small in the beginning, but you anticipate, I hope, that it's going to grow in complexity with many, many pages and such. Man, what a headache, like if you have all these inline style rules and you can't reuse them anywhere. And I would suggest that's another kind of a key maybe mantra to keep in mind throughout the course and throughout your development careers. Reusability. That's all over web development. That's why we have functions, because we can reuse them. We can modularize things. So that's a really huge component. One other thing I would suggest, and I'm guilty of this for sure, and I do this probably more than I should, but sometimes if I'm in a pinch and I'm just like working on something myself, I'm guilty of like just slapping in a style tag here and there, like in the moment in my HTML. And then sure enough, I'll work on that thing like a week later and I'm trying to add style rules in my separate style sheet the way I should, and stuff isn't rendering correctly. And I just can't figure it out. And then sure enough, like last week, I dumped some goofy inline styling that's conflicting with my style sheet. So if for any other reason, if you do those inline stylings and then you forget about them, and if you have a really big, dense piece of HTML, like it's like a needle in a haystack. It's really hard to find where you put those little style attributes. So a very practical reason. Let me put in those are really great answers. Here's a screenshot from the lesson just to kind of recap. So there's 3 ways to add CSS to your app, and you guys pretty much hit all of these. So we can link a separate style sheet in the head of our HTML, and that's probably like the best practice way, like the most dry. And does anyone know what dry stands for, by the way? I'll put that in the Slack. So in web development, you'll probably hear this frequently, this acronym of DRY. Has anyone heard that before or knows what it means? You can come off mic and describe it, or JJ, I'm gonna mute you, buddy. Okay. Cool. Any thoughts?
It means don't repeat yourself. So anytime that you're finding yourself repeating yourself, you should make something repeatable instead of typing the same thing twice.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, man. Yeah, so it's just like, again, that sense of modularity and reusable code. So we don't want to repeat ourselves, and the best way to do that would just to put all those rules in one safe place in a separate style sheet that we can reuse on other pages if we want. The second way we could add CSS, and maybe you guys did this in some of your pre-work or an About Me page or something, you can also put CSS within style tags within the head of your HTML document. So this isn't necessarily the worst way to go about it. Like if you just have one HTML page, that would still give you the flexibility of adding rules to many tags on the page. Like you could still kind of reuse it. However, as soon as you create multiple HTML pages, those rules are still going to be confined to just one of those pages, and you're not going to be able to reuse that CSS. So the best practice is a separate style sheet. If you're in a pinch, maybe throw in some style tags in the head of your HTML. And then the last way to do it, like you guys mentioned, is inline styling. So inline styling, it's kind of, we want to not do that if at all possible, but it certainly is possible to style your tags inline. So, though it's not preferable. Any questions about those three ways to add CSS to our application? Cool. So next, just diagramming the structure of CSS. Hopefully you guys should be somewhat familiar with this, but the terminology for a CSS rule and kind of how we build these CSS rules, if you want to take a look in Slack at the screenshot. So each CSS rule governs the appearance of certain elements, and generally the form looks like this. So you give it the selector. So the selector could be a tag or a class or an ID or a combination of those. And then within the curly brackets, you have the property and the value for that property. So if you have maybe a font family with the value of Georgia, or maybe the font size with the value of 20px or something. But this is the general way to build a CSS rule. And then right here at the bottom, kind of the technical syntax for these CSS rules. Everything inside these curly braces, you could refer to them as the declaration block. So just the proper way to address these things if it comes up. All right, you know what, let's just hop into it. Let's just see some examples of this stuff. So we'll kind of briefly talk about each section, and then I'm gonna give you guys maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do maybe 5 or 6 little activities in your code pen. And so I think we'll move forward like that. And I'll actually build this stuff as well, kind of on camera while you guys are working if you wanna watch. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So look out. And maybe you guys want to set something up similarly. I just have my code pen here on the right, and then I'll have the lesson readme on the left, and I'll certainly paste in screenshots of each section as we go through it. So let's start on this list some common elements, element properties that can be styled. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just some of the greatest hits, right? Because there's a lot of these that you have available to you. But some of the most common ones, we have a color property. Color you can define by like the name, red, green, yellow. There's also specific values such as hexadecimal colors. There's also different types of colors. I'll put this into Slack. Does anyone know what is this color value? You guys have probably seen this before. What is this color value HSL? Has anyone seen that description before? Okay, so that's close. It's kind of in the same ballpark. Here, let me give you an example. So if you want to look in my code pin here, I'm just going to create a quick p tag with some lorem ipsum. And then down here, I'm going to create a rule. I'll do color. And I probably have to look up the exact. I don't think that's valid, but this is kind of the way that it looks. What does HSL stand for here? Let's take a look at all these. Because there's several ways to define these colors in CSS. So these are probably not exact, but this is kind of the, oh yeah, Jason, thank you very much. Yeah, so this is kind of a newer one that you may see out there. So HSL is a way to define the color. It stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. It's kind of a newer one. I need to look up the documentation, but I think each place, so this first one would be hue, second one saturation, third one lightness. I think it goes up to maybe 255, from 0 to 255, that's the range for each one. I have to check my math on that. But yeah, that's HSL, so that's available to you. This is what a hexadecimal code would look like. This is a little more specific, and you have more options available to you. Oh, thanks, Zach. So it's 0 to 360. Let me check that out real quick. I'll just put like 300. Yeah, I probably need to check the documentation. I'm missing something there, but I can look that one up. But some of the other options, so you also have hexadecimal here. There's a limited amount of colors that you can call by name. And so if you Google, I think Microsoft MSN documentation has a really good list of all there may be like 100 names specifically that you can put in. So a better way to grab a color would be to maybe use some sort of color wheel online and just grab the hexadecimal code. So you can get really, really specific. And each one of these 2-digit spaces, they go from, it's kind of a base 16 type situation. So each digit goes from 0 to F. So that gives you 16 varieties of making hex codes. So it gives you quite a few options, which is really cool. And I see that Jason kind of gave me some guidance here on this HSL. We'll try this one more time. Well, actually, all of those should fall into those ranges. So, and I'll check out a color wheel here in a minute. And then this other example, RGBA. So RGB, what does RGB stand for? You can put that into Slack if you want. What does RGB stand for? Yeah, red, green, and blue. Yeah, absolutely. What does this extra argument here, this A, what does that do for us? RGBA. Yeah, so yeah, you guys got it. Yeah, for alpha, transparency, opacity, something like that. Yeah, absolutely. So you can set your color, and then this goes from 0 to 1. So 1 would be completely opaque, 0 would be, completely transparent and such. So CSS has a lot of different varieties of color, and you can Google this stuff if you want to get a little bit more detail. There's also background, which is a really popular common property. So background would be color or adding some sort of image maybe to your background. There's also font size, that's a super common one. Font family. We'll talk a little bit, I think in week 3, has anyone played around with maybe Google Fonts or some other external font? Cool, or maybe even like downloading, a font file. We'll talk a little bit about that in the coming weeks, but font family is a really common one if you want to customize your font. font weight, and then text align to center your text. Again, this is definitely not exhaustive, just a couple of the greatest hits here. So let's pause. Let's take like 5 or 6 minutes, and I want you guys to follow these instructions that I'm putting into Slack. I am going to do this as well. So let's take 5 minutes and walk through steps above in your CodePen. Cool. So let's take about 5 minutes to do that. I'm going to work on this myself, and then if you have any questions, just ask me. But we'll take 5 or 6 minutes and have you guys work on your own CodePens here. Sorry, guys. I think I got kicked off there for a minute. Cool. Let's take about one more minute. I'm going to stop my screen share here. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack if you finished all of those 7 prompts. Does anyone have anything amazing they want to share with us? Not really. Any questions about any of those, the rules that we just kind of walked through? I just put a link into Slack as far as the precise color names that are available for CSS. And it looks like there's around 140 according to W3 Schools. I knew it was like maybe in the hundreds. It's pretty interesting. But yeah. One question I had for you guys, just curious. What does sans serif mean? So you can put it into Slack, or maybe easier like to come off mic without serif. Yes.
No serifs.
That is precisely it. But what is a serif? Is it serif or serif? Am I butchering that?
Oh, I've always called it serifs. I don't know.
All right.
I think it's serif.
All right. Well, I'm calling it serif then. Sorry, Brad. So, so what is a serif?
It's the little thin lines, almost sort of calligraphic. You know, where you have like the fatter lines and the thinner lines within the text.
Yeah.
Whereas a serif or a sans serif or a non-serif is kind of the same weight all the way around the whole letter.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesse has a really good description, that like feather scripty looking stuff. So I think of like the, also like within the font, but like at the ends of the font, like the letter T, like the ends maybe a little, just have like a little curve to them. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And just if you're curious, if this is kind of the first time you've thought about sans serif. So if you guys can see my code pen right here. So right now I have a font family of sans serif. So it's taking them off of each individual character. So let me comment out this font family line. And then now you guys can probably see there's just little kind of feathery wisps at the kind of at the ends of some of these letters. So that's what sans serif means there. I just thought that was cool. I'm not like a typesetter or anything, but I think that's interesting. All right, cool. Let's move forward to the next section. Just want to give you guys some practice and time to work on this on your own. Let's talk about describing IDs and classes and when we should use which. So sometimes just targeting an element is not enough. We can target other attributes of elements within our selectors. So you know what, I'll just give it out to you guys. Can someone describe in their own words when to use a class versus an ID?
Class is something that you're going to reuse multiple times. An ID is something that you just want to use one instance of.
Yeah, that's a pretty elegant description there. Yeah, absolutely. So an ID, generally, we only want to have one element with one element per ID. But classes are reusable. So if we have a particular rule that we want to add to multiple elements in our HTML, you probably want to default to a class for that. The other really good reason, reason that IDs are important and they only need to be on one element is going to come into play when we get into JavaScript and events and DOM manipulation. So you'll use IDs a lot with JavaScript to make sure that you're only targeting one element to add a behavior to. So for example, if we have a lot of buttons in our HTML code and we want one specific button, when we click it, we want it to open up a form or open up some other page or something. JavaScript using IDs gives us the ability to really target in on a specific element and give it a very specific behavior. So even outside the realm of CSS, IDs are really important when it comes to JavaScript and click events, DOM manipulation, things like that. We're going to get into that next week, I believe. But yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. So as it says here in the README, so IDs are only meant to be on one element per page. We want them to be unique. And they're designated with that ID attribute on the element. And then classes are reusable. So if we want to add rules to multiple elements on a page, a class may be a good way to go. So they're very modular. And they're very great. They're great for repeatable ideas, like it says here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. So let's take another 5 minutes. I'm going to put a couple of more exercises here into Slack. And we'll pause. So go ahead and add those 4 items to your code pen. And I'm going to do that as well. Cool, let's take another minute or so and finish this up. And again, I'll open up the floor. If anyone is building something really groundbreaking in CodePen, we would love to see it. Cool. So while you guys are finishing up, I'm going to share my screen, and I have a question for you guys. So if you guys will draw your attention here to my CodePen. So my question is this, and if someone wants to come off mic and talk us through this. So down here in my CSS, I have 3 rules. And each of the rules has a color property attached to it. So my p tags have a color of red, my ID has a color of blue, and my p tag class has a color of green. So does someone want to come on mic and explain, if I have 3 different colors going on here, over here in my rendered HTML page, I only see 2 colors. I only see blue and green. Why don't I see any text in the color red? I mean, I have a rule right here, right? That says all my p tags should be red. And I have 3 p tags in my HTML. Yeah, go ahead.
Because they are cascade, and the last one is the one who rule.
Yeah, so absolutely. So this is a cascading situation. And it's the idea that since IDs are only meant for one element, they take priority. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but the ID rule and this class rule are going to take priority over anything this p tag has, right? So that's why my ID with first is supposed to be the color blue. So an ID is pretty specific. We're going to talk about that here momentarily. So whatever rule I attach to my ID is going to take priority or precedence over any rule that I have on my general p tags, right? So that's why this p tag is blue. And then the same thing here with my 2 p tag classes. So these classes still take priority over your kind of basic general tags. So both of these p tags with the class of p tag class, the font color is going to be green for those 2. So sadly, we don't see any colored reds on here, although I'll create one more p tag and throw some text in here. And since this is a p tag, it doesn't have any ID attributes, any class attributes. So it's going to follow whatever rules apply to this run-of-the-mill p tag. So that's why we're just getting this boring red font color here. Cool. Yeah, it's an excellent answer. Yeah, specificity for sure. Or specificity? I think it's specificity. Always screwed that word up. It's my southern accent. So any questions about, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Any questions about when we want to use classes versus IDs? What has precedence or priority? Any questions for that? So I'm hoping some of this is a little bit of review from the pre-work. I mean, that's our hope anyway. All right, cool. Let's move forward. So we have about 2 more sections here. We'll try to get through these before outcomes time. So let's talk a little bit about describing the cascade. So we've already talked a little bit about this. So cascade refers to how some properties of elements are passed down to their children. So cascading style sheets. So this is a very important component of that concept. And a couple of points to consider. So properties dealing with text are inherited by their children, properties dealing with spacing are not inherited by their children. And then here's another link to some of the W3 consortium. I'll put this into Slack actually. It looks a little data science-y, but just some specifics as far as the definition of cascade and more information. So I'll just put that into Slack if you're interested. But yeah, I think you guys have some really solid definitions on the concept of CSS, so that's awesome. So let's take about another 5 or 6 minutes and let's work on these 5 bullet points that are in that screenshot. I'll go ahead and like copy these and paste them directly into Slack as well. So let's go ahead and take 5 or 6 minutes and we'll knock these out. Cool. Let's take about another minute or so, and then we'll walk through it. Cool. So if you're still working, that's cool. I'm just going to take a moment and kind of walk through what I did. So again, these five kind of mini exercises were meant to demonstrate the idea that with cascading style sheets, that style rules can cascade down from parents to children. So I'm going to just show my code pen what I did. So if you can see my code pen here. So I just went through the 5 bullet points. So I created a section tag, which was number 1. Number 2, put some text in the section tag, but outside the p tag. So right here inside that section tag, I put some text. Then I created a p tag underneath, and I have some text inside that p tag. And then it asks us to style just the section tag to give the text some color. So down here in my CSS, I made a rule for my section tags with the color of blue. And then kind of the end result is to demonstrate that the p tag has also been affected. So even though we don't have any specific rules on our p tag, this is to demonstrate again that the rule that we put on section is going to cascade down to what's inside the section. So in this case, this text inside the p tag is also going to have the color of blue. So a pretty cool kind of concept to keep in mind with CSS. Did anyone do anything differently? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Did anyone do anything different, or does anyone have any questions about that concept of cascading in CSS?
I have a question, Mark.
Sure.
Does it matter what order you put rules into your CSS file?
It does not. And I'll say that with a caveat that I'll address here in just a second. So in your CSS file, it depends on kind of your workflow preference. Some shops will suggest that you put maybe the tag names first, maybe alphabetically, then classes, then IDs. So try to put like the least important stuff at the top and kind of go down. So maybe like the first rule in your style sheet may be the body tag, or like your HTML tag or something. Other shops that I've worked at, they want us to put the style rules by maybe the page that we're working on. So maybe all the rules for the About Me page are in one place. Maybe all the rules that are specific to the Contact Me are in one place. It really depends on how you want to set it up. Other places will put IDs at the top because IDs take precedence over everything else, right? So no, the order of the rules don't matter in the CSS style sheet. It's pretty much at your discretion how you want to set them up. I say that with one caveat, which we'll address here in a minute. If you have a tag that has the exact same rules, we talked a little bit about the specificity. Man, I'm butchering that word, you guys. Specificity. So if two rules happen to have the exact same priority, then the rule that's read last is going to take priority in that sense. That's a pretty rare case. We'll take a look at one example. But if the specificity is tied, then the order does matter because it's going to default to like the last rule that it read. That rarely happens, but that'd be like the small caveat to that. Cool. All right. Well, let's move forward. So let's talk a little bit about how to combine various selectors. We're going to talk in the next few weeks about advanced selectors and pseudo selectors. So we're going to talk about some more advanced topics. But let's just take a look at how to combine your basic tags, classes, and IDs and such. So if you want to take a look at that screenshot I put into Slack, I'm just going to run through these and then we'll do a couple of exercises and let you guys practice them. But selectors can be more complex than just using a rule for an element or a class or an ID. You can actually combine these selectors and classes and IDs to make really specific rules. So this first bullet point, you can have a set of rules affect multiple selections by listing them. So if you notice in that first bullet point, we have the P, comma, an ID of left column, right? So everyone, we're comfortable with IDs have the pound sign and classes have a dot in front of them. I'll put that here into Slack. Cool. So classes start with a dot or a period, and IDs will start with a pound sign or a hash mark, whatever you want to call it. But if you want to have one rule that affects several different selectors, you can do that with a comma. So you can just list those with the comma here. That's I see that really frequently. So we have like 6 H tags, right? Header tags. And occasionally you'll see that for kind of your basic tags. Sometimes you'll see like H1, comma, H2, comma, H3, and then some basic rule like the font family or font size. Well, not size because the headers are vary, but maybe the font family or font color or something. So you can just put a comma and you can list several tags and classes and IDs and just give them one rule. So that's a nice way to, again, dry up your code and make it more efficient. The second bullet point here, you can combine attributes to narrow down how many elements are affected. So I'm going to put this into Slack in case that screenshot's not super clear. So for example, this a dot important. So this would be a rule that will style all the anchor tags that also have an important class. So that's one way to get a little bit more specific. So any a tag with important is going to be affected by that rule. And then you can see that here. I'll put this into Slack. So that rule will affect this element. There you go. So if we had an anchor tag with the class of important, then that rule would apply to that one only. And you can also do things like this left column visible, for example, just going through the screenshot here. So this is another way to combine, you know, an ID of left column with the visible property, or in this case, the visible class. We also have the display property. We have display none, display hidden, things like that. But you can also combine IDs and classes if you want to get really specific. You can also combine 2 classes. I'll put this into Slack. So in this example that I just put into Slack, so this would be a rule that's applied to every element with a profile and a minimized class. So it's just kind of interesting to note, and it's here in the lesson. So for this particular rule, we want to make sure that there's a space between those 2 classes. So in our CSS, we can have that dot profile and dot minimize right up next to each other. We want to chain them together. However, when we write our HTML, we want to make sure there's a space between them, like I just put into Slack. If we don't put a space between those rules in our HTML, then it's going to think the rule name is profile minimized and that it's not two separate classes. Has anyone played around with Bootstrap or some other front-end CSS library? Okay, a couple of you guys had. So again, another example that I can think of off the top of my head is this is really, I think I use this too. If I'm playing around with Bootstrap or some other library that already has its own classes and conventions built in. So if I want to do something a little different than what they're giving me out of the box, I don't want to go into their CSS style sheet and start changing stuff because it's just not a good practice to do so. What I would probably do is I would probably create my own class and name it something different and then put that class onto whatever element I'm trying to add a rule to. So I would add a class in addition to whatever Bootstrap class I was using. So sometimes that's a good strategy. And then this final example, just kind of something to consider, kind of a best practice. So you guys can probably check this one out. And why wouldn't this rule that I just put into Slack, why wouldn't this be a good practice? This div ID of left column. Why is that a little redundant? And you can put an answer into Slack or you can come off of mic. Why might this not be the most efficient rule for CSS styling?
Because there's only one, you can only have one ID with that name. So to say div left column is redundant.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's just a little bit more work. It's unnecessary. So this div with an ID of left column, we don't even need that div part. I mean, since an ID should only be on one element, we can just do that to create a rule for it. So just something to keep in mind. So you can combine different selectors and such, but when it comes to IDs, most of the time you don't need to combine an ID with something else unless you're trying to get children elements of an ID. So maybe you have like a UL, like some sort of ordered or unordered list. And if it has an ID on it, maybe you want to like grab the ID and then the children beneath it. So maybe you would do something like maybe something like this if you really wanted to get specific. So maybe you could do like grab the element with the ID of left column and then like do something to all the LIs within that specific ID. So that may be a good strategy. Cool. And then this last bullet point, it says you can filter out tags based on their ancestors. But we're going to see that in practice with these 6 exercises right here. So we'll just leave that. You guys can see that in person. And then we'll talk about it afterwards. But any questions about how to combine various selectors? Again, I feel like a lot of this stuff is just kind of getting in there and playing around with it, getting comfortable. So let me put these 6 bullet points into Slack. So again, let's take another 5 or 6 minutes. You guys build this in your own code pen, and then we will regroup and walk through them.
Should we restart over what we have in CodePen, or just keep building off of what we've been using?
Yeah, I'll just keep building. If you looked at my example, I just like commented out some code, but you can delete it. You can do what you want. This stuff isn't very precious, so.
All right.
And also, if you're saving your code pen, then you can always kind of go back to a previous version. Yeah, let's take another minute or so, and then we'll walk through this example. You can go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack if you don't mind when you're all done there. Cool. All right, folks. So it's 3:50. We're almost at 4, and you guys have outcomes. So I want to definitely give you guys a little bit of a break before you hop into your outcome session, because you guys will be in there for quite a while, and it's your first one on the first week. So let me briefly show you my version of the code, and then give you guys a little bit of a break. So, and just see if you guys have any quick questions. So the examples asked to build a couple of p tags and then a div tag. And down here in my CSS, I gave my p tags a background of green. So both of my p tags have this janky green background. Specifically, I want any p tag that has a class of active. As per the instructions, I want that to have a bold font weight. So my p tag that also has an active class is going to be bold. And so we can see that up here. So this top p tag section, I put this class of active. So only that one has the bold text. And then finally down here, I created a div and I put a class of active on it. And then I put this font size of 40. So the lorem ipsum in this div with the class of active is really huge. So just an example of how to combine various selectors here. I hope that's like a little bit of a, I'm gonna stop my screen share. A little bit of a review of what you guys went through in the pre-work. I know it's not super sexy, but we're gonna get into a lot of cool CSS stuff in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So are there any questions before we break for your pre-outcome session? Anything pressing? There's a couple of things we didn't quite get to in this lesson, but I'll push it to our next CSS coverage. All right, cool. Well, thanks for hanging in there. You guys have really trucked along today. So have a great outcome session. And yeah, take like a 10-minute break. And I think Seth wants you guys back here at 4. So we'll see you then.
Actually, let me just clarify something real quick.
Oh, sure.
So everyone should have access to the outcomes channel in your Slack. And Seth has included the room he will be in. So actually, we're going to be closing this room out and just join him over there.
Oh, okay,
right?
Cool.
And then at 6 o'clock, we'll call you guys back so that we can give out homework. Alrighty? Okay. Have fun, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.